everyone, my name is Katie. I chose to do my research on Bartleby the Scrivener. I chose to focus on Melville's description of Bartleby and Bartleby's mental health during his employment and the time leading up to his death. Melville is very deliberate in his description of the characters in this story. He gives both good and bad aspects of each character, and the descriptions are nearly a page in length, showing that all of the employees were a little eccentric, but their quirks appeared at different times in the day, so they were manageable. Bartleby is an excellent worker, but his quirks are all day. When Melville describes Bartleby, he says, "A motionless young man stood upon my office threshold, the door being open, for it was summer. I can see the figure now, pallidly neat, pitiably respectable, incurably forlorn. It was Bartleby." He continues on saying that the Scrivener was the victim of an innate and incurable disorder. I might give alms to his body, but his body did not pain him. It was his soul that suffered, and his soul I cannot reach. The descriptions that Melville uses is very deliberate, especially in regards to Bartleby. He says that it is not his body that suffered, but his soul. The work that Bartleby had done prior to being a scrivener was presumably something that he had done his entire life. When he left, it may have caused a break within Bartleby's mind, causing him to be withdrawn and solitary. In 1985, Rosemary Kilpatrick and Karen True examined the relationship between mental health and unemployed elderly men in Ireland. The group studied 121 men ages 25 through 42. The participants kept a time diary in which they logged how their time was spent daily. The research showed that the more time the men spent doing an activity, the better off they were psychologically. The participants that did not have their time filled became bored and distressed at being unable to do something to occupy their time. They wrote, findings suggested that for both groups, structured and purposeful use of time was positively associated with self-esteem and negatively associated with depressive symptoms. However, the unemployed group were less organized and less purposeful in their use of time than the employed group. The participants answered a questionnaire and were divided into clusters based on similarities in their answers. They explain why they chose this method of grouping by saying cluster analysis works on the principle of merging the two most closely related individuals in a group to form a cluster. This procedure then being repeated until eventually only two clusters remain. The decision as to the cluster solution finally chosen rests on the need to balance two opposing tendencies. The researchers repeated the clustering based on different starting points in order to achieve the best results possible. In Table 1, it shows the varying activities that the participants took part in and what category they fell into. In Table 2, it shows the characteristic that the clusters were broken down into, along with the location of the activity, the person they were with, and the activity that they were doing. Table 3 shows the men's scores. Table 4 breaks down their percentages in each cluster. The final table produced in this study shows the work history of each group. It is broken down into 5 main categories: the length of their unemployment, if they had been previously employed, the type of work that they did, and the reason that they left their job. A similar study was done in the U.S., and the results were published in December of 2006 by the researchers William T. Gallo, Elizabeth H. Bradley, Sun Mei Tang, and Staslav V. Kozel. The studies differed because the study included both men and women. There was also a higher number of participants in this study. 617 people participated and were between the ages 51 and 61. The participants each had at least one job loss between 1990 and 2000. All job losses were either plant closures or layoffs. The researchers used information they obtained from the U.S. Health and Retirement Survey. They examined the effects of multiple job losses within a small amount of time. They explained their research by saying, "We investigate the impact of successive job losses on both the level of depressive symptoms and the likelihood of clinically relevant depressive symptoms. supported by the notion that the repeated exposure to involuntary job loss will be desensitized individuals to the experience of employment separation, creating a form of immunity against further declines in psychological well-being. The study not only followed individuals with multiple job losses, but those with only one within the time frame in order to have a control group. They went through and dismissed participants that did not fit the criteria for the study in order to simplify it. The data was then broken down into levels of depressive symptoms. The levels were reevaluated after each wave of interviews were conducted. The score or level was based on the linking algorithm for each respondent at each wave. They then had secondary outcomes based on the clinically relevant depressive symptoms. The study published tables that showed the characteristics of the sample and their variables, including age, gender, race, education, marital status, net worth, and other illnesses. The second table showed the mean depressive symptom scores and those depressive symptoms that were clinically relevant pre-job loss and post-job loss, along with the percentage change. The third table took the effect of the recurrent involuntary job losses and levels of depressive symptoms. The results were calculated unadjusted, partially adjusted, and fully adjusted. The fourth table showed the results from logistic analysis and the association between recurrent involuntary job loss and the likelihood of clinically depressive symptoms. They concluded that the initial job loss was the most significant, but the successive job losses produced weaker effects than the first, with the effects decreasing with higher amounts of involuntary job loss. They acknowledged that there may have been more significant job losses earlier in their lives that would have had a greater effect on their psyche. Bartleby had a career in the postal industry for the majority of his life. The change from his nearly lifelong career to another would have started the decline in Bartleby's mental health. With him being fired from being a scrivener, the uncertainty of his daily schedule, and the lack of activity, Bartleby's mental health took a hard hit, and it showed within his behavior. While the study done in the U.S. may have concluded that multiple job losses did not impact the mind as much as the initial layoff, it is possible that being laid off from the postal job was the most significant job loss in Bartleby's life, thus having a greater impact on his mental stability than average. Melville was ahead of his time when writing Bartleby and the Scrivener. His work was a commentary on the relationship between employers and their employees. It examined how the perfect employee is often an outcast because they do not comply with social norms. The story of Bartleby can be used as a warning in today's world. Bartleby is what occurs when conformity takes precedence over individuality. Like John Green says in his 1993 paper, Bartleby the Perfect Pupil. He writes, "The Scrivener himself is a paradox, in that he is not an anomaly produced by an educational system designed to achieve predictable uniformity. The crux of this paradox is that Bartleby so perfectly embodies the virtues that the system sought to inoculate. It is precisely this which marginalizes him." Green continues on with saying that Bartleby is a perfect example of how education is now designed to create more efficient and compliant or moral employees. Bartleby spent his life being compliant and unquestioning to the point that his mind deteriorated and he was unable to function without a set schedule and routine. When Bartleby became the perfect pupil, he was so removed from what was deemed normal. He spent too much time perfecting his work and not enough time with his fellow employees. Through the eyes of his employer, Bartleby is seen as lazy and unwilling to work. When Bartleby is fired from being a scrivener and the offices are moved, his mental health declines significantly to the point where he is no longer speaking to anyone. Bartleby is a complicated character that faced mental health issues. Melville was ahead of his time when he wrote Bartleby. It is a great example of how someone's mental health impacts their lives. Thank you for watching my presentation.